Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There is a silence deeper than death on Krieg. The soil itself does not yield, not to life, not to change, not even to memory. It is gray, irradiated dust that never forgets the fire that once consumed it. Here, beneath a sky that never clears, the wind carries ash like a sermon. Quiet, repetitive, absolute. Every step crunches on the bones of the past, and every trench dug bleeds history that has already been buried and mourned 1,000 times over. The Death Korps of Krieg were not born. They were entombed into existence. They emerged not from mothers, but from tubes and drills, their first breath filtered through rebreathers, their first lullaby the distant percussion of artillery. This is not life as we know it. It is a ritual, a punishment, a devotion carved in flesh. There is no glory, no triumph, only duty, only silence, only death. Krieg was not always a graveyard. Long before the word became synonymous with attrition and annihilation, it was a prosperous hive world, nestled within segmentum tempestus. Its spires reached for the stars, its manufactoria fed the endless hunger of the Imperium's war machine, and its people walked streets illuminated by artificial sunlight, unburdened by the cold austerity that would come to define their descendants. Yet beneath this illusion of prosperity simmered a rot. Pride turned to arrogance, loyalty twisted into defiance. The heresy of Krieg was not born in chaos, but in calculation. The ruling council, driven by ambition and a belief in independence, declared secession from the Imperium. It was a blasphemy dressed in the language of self-determination. They thought the Emperor's reach was too far, his gaze distracted, his might overextended. They believed Krieg would be forgotten, or worse, forgiven. They were wrong. It was Colonel Jerton who delivered the sentence. A loyalist officer, he understood that mere reconquest would not be enough. The taint of rebellion had to be scorched out, root and soul. So he initiated the most terrible act of loyalty imaginable, atomic purification. With cold resolve, Jerton unleashed atomic fire upon his own world, initiating a civil war that would last for generations. Krieg became a crucible. Cities vanished in nuclear flame, the atmosphere choked with radioactive soot, the very crust of the planet fractured. Entire generations lived and died in the choking dust, beneath ceilings of collapsed hives, in bunkers and sublevels where light was a myth. But what emerged from this cataclysm was not simply a broken world. It was a new creed. Krieg became a world of penitence, its people no longer seeking joy, only redemption. The fires did not end rebellion. They ended identity. No longer were they men and women of Krieg. They were simply soldiers. Each generation bred for sacrifice, taught to value death over dishonor, conditioned to see obedience not as virtue but as salvation. The Death Korps was not just a military force. It was a planetary covenant, a promise that the betrayal of Krieg would be paid for in blood, trench by trench, grave by grave. The Imperium, ever pragmatic in its cruelty, accepted this offering. Krieg was not reconquered, it was reclaimed by those who destroyed it. When the Civil War ended, what remained was a husk of a planet, but one fervently loyal. And that loyalty was no longer questioned. When the Death Korps requested a tithing as an Imperial Guard regiment, none argued. After all, what better soldiers than those who believed death was the only absolution? And so the world remained, broken, silent, endlessly productive in the only export it now knew: flesh to feed the meat grinder of the galaxy. In every new campaign they joined, Krieg repaid its ancestral sin with bodies. They fought with a fervor that unsettled even the most hardened Astra Militarum commanders. They did not flinch, did not retreat, did not question. Every Krieger was a walking prayer, not for victory, but for atonement. Their deaths were not sacrifices, they were payments. To understand the Death Korps, one must first understand that they were forged in fire, not just as a metaphor, but as a historical truth. Their world was not conquered. It was burned until nothing remained but ashes that whispered loyalty. And from those ashes they rose, not as survivors but as revenants. The Death Korps of Krieg are not alive in the way we understand it. They are living echoes of a decision made long ago. Better a dead loyalist than a living traitor. To be born on Krieg is not to be given life. It is to be assigned function. There are no mothers on Krieg. No lullabies, no nursery rhymes echo through the steel bunkers deep beneath the planet's crust. Instead, there are vats, racks, laboratories of steel and silence, where children are not cradled but decanted. Genetic material harvested and manipulated, optimized not for intelligence or creativity, but for compliance, endurance, and expendability. From the moment the first cell divides, a Krieger is property of Krieg, of the Munitorum, of the Emperor. The infant does not cry, he is trained not to. Pain is introduced early, and comfort is withheld with surgical precision. Discipline is not taught, it is enforced through constant exposure. A child's first lesson is not language but stillness. Their world is a tunnel of gray walls, gray food, gray clothes, and gray air filtered through masks they will never be allowed to remove. There is no sky, no wind, no sun. Only the mechanical hum of life in containment. By age 3, the indoctrination has begun in earnest. Education is not a privilege but a conditioning regime. They learn the tenets of obedience and the sin of self. To speak when not spoken to is rebellion. To hesitate is betrayal. To question is heresy. Instructors are not teachers but instruments of programming. Punishment is swift, never explained, never challenged. A Krieger does not ask why. They are taught that the Emperor asks only one thing: to die well. Play is a foreign concept. What would they play with? Who would they play with? Every peer is a future corpse. Every peer is a mirror. Friendships are discouraged. Attachments are weaknesses. Names are reduced to numbers, identities to roles. A boy may grow next to another for 10 years, sleep beside him, train with him, bleed with him, and yet never know his name. Bonds are forged not through affection, but through silent recognition. We are all the same. We will all die the same. Physical training is ceaseless. Muscles are shaped not for athleticism, but for endurance. They are taught to march for days without rest, to operate under fire, to dig until fingers bleed and break. Pain is not something to be avoided, but something to be absorbed. It becomes background noise, a second heartbeat. Hunger is embraced. Fatigue is sacred. These are the gifts that prepare them for the front, where such suffering will only grow. By adolescence, each Krieger has killed. Training exercises involve live ammunition. Mistakes are not corrected, they are cold. To be weak is to die. To disobey is to disappear. Some units never make it to deployment because none survive the selection. This is not considered a failure, but a purification. Only those truly worthy will carry Krieg's debt into the stars. Only the most fanatically obedient, the most willingly sacrificial, are given a rebreather and a lasgun and told to serve. And the rebreather, that iconic, impassive mask, becomes more than equipment. It becomes identity. A Krieger sees the world through tinted lenses. He smells only filtered air. His voice, when he uses it, is metallic, stripped of emotion. Over time, many forget what their own face looks like. Some never even see it, conditioned from the start to wear the mask always, even in rest. It is said that the first time a Krieger breathes unfiltered air, he chokes on it. Not because it is foul, but because it is real. This process of shaping a child into a guardsman is not cruel by the standards of Krieg. It is mercy. It is justice. Every youth who survives training is a weapon sanctified by pain, forged in solitude, and tempered by the ashes of 1,000 ancestors. There are no graduates, no ceremonies, no pride, only deployment orders, only a trench waiting somewhere in the void. Only the final lesson. Your life is not yours, it belongs to Krieg, it belongs to the Emperor, and its only value lies in how quickly it can be spent. The trench is a holy place on Krieg. Not a mere tactic, not a necessity, a shrine. Dug deep into the bone of alien worlds or churned through the irradiated dirt of their own broken home, these earthworks are more than shelter. They are symbols of permanence in impermanence. A Krieger does not see a trench as protection. He sees it as purpose. Every spade of dirt moved, every plank of rotted wood set into mud, every meter reinforced against bombardment, it is all sacred work. War for the Death Corps is not maneuver or finesse. It is not swift strikes, clever flanks, or rapid deployment. It is pressure. It is patience. It is the slow, grinding horror of attrition that wears down both flesh and will. They call it trench warfare, but that phrase does not capture the spiritual element. For the Death Corps, it is not just strategy. It is a form of worship. The trench is where they live, fight, suffer, and die. And in doing so, they are closest to the Emperor. The world above the trench, the surface, is a temporary nightmare. It is where shells fall without rhythm, where snipers wait without blinking, where gas and fire and Lascanon bursts streak through the haze. The no man's land is not crossed for glory or gain. It is crossed because the order is given, and orders are holy. Kriegers do not fear the surface. They understand it for what it is, the crucible. To leave the trench is to be tested. To return is rare, to die is expected. And yet the trench is no haven. Disease blooms in the stagnant water. Corpses rot beside the living. Rats feast and multiply. The air is stale with the stench of sweat, blood, and chemical weapon residue. Sleep comes in fits, stolen between bombardments that shake the world like the end times. But in all of this, the filth, the decay, the endless repetition, the Krieger feels at home. It mirrors the spiritual death they've already accepted. The trench is honest. It promises nothing but endurance and the slow passage of time. Between offensives, life continues in eerie stillness. Kriegers repair sandbags, reinforce parapets, clean weapons. They do not talk. They do not complain. Even in moments of relative calm, there is no laughter, no music, no conversation. Just the clink of tools, the whisper of mud beneath boots, and the occasional cough filtered through a rebreather. And all the while, artillery rumbles in the distance, reminding them that this peace is temporary, that their real work is still ahead or already behind, buried with their brothers in collapsed segments of trench. When the order for assault comes, it is obeyed without hesitation. Kriegers rise from their dugouts, line up against the wall, and climb. One after another into the storm. Last fire shears them apart. Shells burst in their ranks. Flamers scythe through them. But they keep going, not because they think they'll succeed, not because they hope to win, but because that is what was asked of them. Because dying in the attempt is the point. And if, by miracle or numbers, they reach the enemy trench, they will fight like machines until killed, or until their bayonets snap from overuse. There is no elation in holding ground, no cheer when the enemy is pushed back. A trench gained is simply another pit to fortify, another grave to prepare. They do not write letters home, they do not sing songs of victory. They replace their dead, clean their rifles, and wait. The next wave will come. It always comes. To others, to the Cadians, the Mordians, the Catacans, trench warfare is an ordeal, a trial, something to be endured. To the Death Corps, it is ideal. They were made for this, literally. Their bodies are trained for it, but more importantly, their minds are empty of anything that would make it unbearable. No ambition, no ego, no need for comfort. Just the trench, the gun, and the Emperor's will, passed down through vox hiss and signal flare. It is not hell. It is home. And when the campaign ends, if it ever ends, and the trenches are filled with corpses and broken war gear, the Kriegers will not rejoice. They will simply look to the next battlefield, the next stretch of mud to consecrate with their silence and blood. For on Krieg, they teach one final lesson above all others. Suffering is not the price of duty. It is the proof of it. Discipline is the marrow in the bones of every Krieger. It is not imposed, it is intrinsic, etched into the psyche before thought even forms. For most soldiers across the galaxy, discipline is a behavior, trained, drilled, enforced through hierarchy and threat of punishment. For the Death Corps of Krieg, it is a state of being. To break discipline would be to break identity, to cease being what they are. It is not a choice. It is not even a possibility. The most iconic expression of this is their refusal to retreat. Not just reluctance. Refusal. Orders to fall back are interpreted not as commands, but as tests of loyalty. Even when such orders are genuine, the Kriegers are known to ignore them if they believe their sacrifice will serve the greater purpose. Entire regiments have been lost because they would not yield ground, choosing annihilation over the shame of survival. This is not bravado. It is not stubbornness. It is doctrine wrapped in faith. They march into gunfire without hesitation, their gait unbroken, even as the soldier to the left is vaporized, the one to the right reduced to meat. Where others flinch or duck, they maintain formation. This level of resolve is not natural. It is cultivated through decades of psychological obliteration, where the concept of self-preservation is not discouraged but surgically removed. Pain is ignored. Fear is irrelevant. Death is expected. There is a haunting beauty in their formations. As shells fall, as chaos erupts, the Kriegers move like specters, not stiff or mechanical, just eerily calm. Their steps are synchronized, their drills perfect, even under withering fire. They do not shout, they do not scream. Orders are followed without debate. The commanding officer could be a corpse, And if he is, the next in line simply takes his place without a word. The machine never stops, the doctrine never wavers, and they do not boast. In the rare moments where they survive and hold a line others thought lost, there are no celebrations, no roars of triumph. The only sound is the labored breath behind rebreathers and the click of bayonets being reattached for the next wave. Glory is not their reward. Obedience is. Some commanders in the wider Astra Militarum admire the Death Corps for this. Others fear them, because such absolute discipline defies human understanding. It is not loyalty in the way most perceive it. It is not love of the Emperor. It is not even hatred of the enemy. It is the hollow echo of a world that burned itself alive to prove a point, and never stopped burning. One of the most chilling aspects of their discipline is how they treat their wounded. A Krieger who is maimed does not cry out. He administers field triage or requests euthanasia with the same calm as if reporting ammunition levels. If the injury is too great to continue fighting, he does not plead for help. He does not cling to life. He asks to be left behind to cover the retreat if one is even considered. And if the order is death, he obeys. No hesitation. No questions. This absolute obedience extends even to suicide orders. Kriegers have been known to storm fortified positions with no chance of survival, not because it was necessary tactically, but because it was demanded symbolically. To be given an impossible task is not seen as an insult. It is seen as a blessing. The Emperor, through his chain of command, has chosen them for this sacrifice. There can be no greater honor. And when one fails, when a Krieger hesitates, falters, or flees, the consequences are swift and final. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in ritual. They are removed, shot, buried with no name. Not as punishment, but as purification. The regiment does not grieve. It does not remember. Failure is erased so that the collective body remains pure. What makes this discipline even more terrifying is how emotionless it is. There is no fervor, no fanaticism, no wide eyes, no raving prayers, just action, just execution. Some say it is inhuman, but it is not. It is deeply human, just a humanity stripped of everything except purpose. The Death Corps do not die screaming for glory. They die silently, face down in the mud, weapon clutched, knowing that their death is not a loss. It is an expectation fulfilled. In the end, their discipline is not meant to inspire. It is meant to endure. It is not a shield or a sword. It is a chain that binds them to duty so tightly, they no longer know what freedom feels like. And that, perhaps, is their greatest strength and their greatest tragedy. Behind the mask, there is silence, not just in sound, but in spirit. The rebreather is more than a tool for survival. It is a barrier between the world and the soul. It obscures identity, erases expression, seals away the last fragile pieces of humanity that might have once dwelled within. And yet somewhere behind those dark lenses and filtered breath, a mind remains. Not a free mind, perhaps, but a mind nonetheless. What does it see? What does it feel? Does it feel anything at all? We do not know. We cannot know. The Death Corps of Krieg does not speak of itself. There are no memoirs, no interviews, no drunken tales by a campfire. When Kriegers die, their names are not remembered. When they live, their stories are not told. But among the fanbase, among those who read between the lines of battle reports and Black Library prose, speculation blooms. There must be something behind the mask, a flicker of thought, a moment of hesitation, a ghost of emotion. Some believe the conditioning is absolute, that from birth, all personal will is burned away, and what remains is a shell, functional, obedient, dead in every sense but biological. But others, especially among fans, imagine something darker, not emptiness, but suppression. That inside every Krieger is a storm, tightly bound and hidden, never released. That they do feel, they just refuse to let it show. Imagine for a moment a guardsman in a trench watching comrades fall one by one, saying nothing. Not because he doesn't care, but because he has been taught that caring is weakness. That mourning is betrayal. There are tales, unofficial and whispered, of Kriegers who have paused for a second too long, who have lingered over the body of a fallen brother, who have stood silently after the fighting stopped, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts they do not understand. In these tiny cracks, the mask falters. Not physically, emotionally. The soul tries to remember what it once was and is met with a wall. Consider the notion of identity. A Krieger is not given a name, only a number. And yet, in every living being, the mind seeks individuality. It is an instinct, primal and unavoidable. In the unending silence of their ranks, might a Krieger begin to build an internal world, a name they never speak, a memory they never share, a face behind the mask they imagine, though they haven't seen their own reflection since childhood? There's a particularly harrowing theory that some Kriegers adopt fragments of personality from the dead, that in the absence of self, they absorb echoes. A comrade who dies muttering a phrase might leave that phrase lodged in the survivor's mind. A fallen soldier's gesture, a way of standing, a glance, all picked up, repeated, mimicked, not consciously, but as a way of holding on to something. Not love, not friendship, just traces of something lost. And yet, some argue this is false hope, that to ascribe emotion or memory to the Death Corps is to misunderstand them. They are not tragic heroes. They are not repressed romantics. They are what Krieg made them, tools. Obedience has replaced personality. They feel nothing because they have no framework for feeling. Pitying them is like pitying a bolt gun for not singing. But perhaps the truth lies between the extremes. Perhaps the most haunting possibility is that there is something inside, but it is so far buried, so utterly unrecognizable, that it no longer resembles human emotion as we know it. A Krieger might not feel joy, sorrow, or anger. But what if they feel duty as an emotion? What if sacrifice is their form of connection? What if pain is not endured, but embraced, because it is the only sensation that proves they are still alive? When a Krieger stands on the battlefield, last gun steady, watching his comrades fall, there might be no tears. But maybe, just maybe, there is a moment, a breath, a heartbeat where he remembers. Not a name, not a face, but a feeling, a fragment, before the trench, before the mask, before the war. And then it's gone, swallowed by the scream of artillery and the hiss of his rebreather. We'll never know for sure. That's the nature of the mask. It hides everything, even from the one who wears it. The Death Corps of Krieg do not strategize in the traditional sense. Their battlefield doctrine is not built upon adaptability, cunning, or innovation. It is built upon inevitability. Where others see victory as something to be achieved, the Kriegers see it as something to be endured. They do not seek to outthink the enemy. They aim to outlast them, not with brilliance, but with corpses. Not with maneuver, but with monotony. Not with genius, but with grim, suffocating resolve. Their preferred form of warfare is siege. The slow, deliberate unmaking of fortifications and spirits alike. They dig, they entrench, they bombard, day after day, week after week, sometimes year after year. The Death Corps do not fear time. They measure success in meters gained, in bunkers collapsed, in enemy formations starved into submission. While others might grow restless with prolonged campaigns, Kriegers are most comfortable when the war becomes endless. That is where they thrive, in the long defeat that slowly becomes a victory through sheer attrition. To an outsider, their tactics seem wasteful. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of Kriegers thrown at a single position, waves crashing against bunkers like flesh against stone. They march across no man's land, not because it is tactically sound, but because they are ordered to. And in doing so, they accomplish something no calculation can predict. They break morale. Not their own, never theirs, but the enemy's. What do you do when your ambush doesn't matter? When your heavy weapons only delay the inevitable? When the soldiers you're killing come in lines that do not end, do not scream, do not run? The Death Corps use minimal armor. They prefer artillery, and even that is employed with the same philosophy. Saturation. Shell after shell, barrage after barrage, until the ground itself forgets what it once was. Then the infantry comes, not behind the shelling, through it. They advance in synchronicity with the blasts, embracing the chaos, embracing the chance of friendly fire. Their own artillery is not sacred, it is just another tool, like their lives. They are known to reject air support if it undermines their ground advance. They disdain orbital bombardments that might obliterate the enemy too cleanly. To a Krieger, a war won without sacrifice is a war not worth winning. Their doctrine, if it can be called that, is steeped in martyrdom. The trenches are altars, and they are both priests and offerings. And then there is their infamous use of death charges, suicide squads sent to detonate explosives within enemy lines, or to draw fire so others may advance. These are not considered special operations, they are routine. Kriegers volunteer or are assigned, with no more ceremony than a shift rotation. There is no glory, no farewell, just a nod, a task, and a final march. Even when engaging in defense, the Death Corps do not retreat. They layer their positions with redundant lines, interconnected trenches, kill zones, and pre-designated points of self-destruction. If the enemy overruns a position, Kriegers will detonate it with themselves still inside. Not out of desperation, out of design. Denial of ground is not enough. It must be denial of blood, denial of meaning. The enemy must take nothing from them, not even their corpses. Technology plays a minimal role in their doctrine. While the Imperium struggles to maintain its relics and ancient war machines, the Kriegers do not clamor for them. They do not covet advanced gear or prototype weapons. They use shovels, bayonets, lasguns, and spades, tools that do not break, tools that do not require reverence, tools that are extensions of their own bodies. To the Death Corps, simplicity is sanctity. And while many Guard regiments maintain esprit de corps, slogans, battle cries, the Death Corps do not. Their silence is part of the doctrine. Their cohesion is not built through camaraderie, but through shared erasure. The less individual they are, the stronger the whole becomes. Orders are obeyed not because they are logical, but because they are orders. That obedience, cold, absolute, and unfeeling, is the foundation of their entire approach to war. They do not adapt because they do not believe in survival. They do not retreat because they do not believe in failure. They do not innovate because they do not believe the old ways are flawed. Their doctrine is not efficient. It is not optimal, but it is unbreakable. And in a galaxy where chaos spreads like fire and betrayal lurks in every shadow, unbreakable is sometimes the only doctrine that matters. When the Death Corps arrive, everything changes. Not because they are loud or boastful, quite the opposite. Their presence drains color from the battlefield. It mutes the chatter, stills the laughter, and draws an invisible curtain between them and their allies. Other regiments, even hardened veterans, find themselves whispering in their presence. There is an aura around the Kriegers, not supernatural, but psychological, as if death itself marches beside them. They do not announce their arrival with banners or ceremony. They disembark from their landers in perfect silence, forming into lines even before the dust settles. No cheers, no greetings, no handshakes. They move into trenches, begin digging, reinforcing, deploying with a precision so mechanical it unsettles the human eye. Local commanders initially appreciate the reinforcements until they see what that truly means, until they see what the Kriegers bring. There's a story, unofficial, of course, of a Cadian officer who received word that Krieg regiments were being deployed to his sector. He prepared quarters, readied briefings, and arranged for joint drills. When the Kriegers arrived, they refused the barracks. They began digging new trenches in terrain already deemed secure. They declined briefings, stating that orders were already known. When asked for coordination, they offered no words, only timetables and grid coordinates. By the time the Cadian realized what was happening, the Kriegers had already begun an offensive without waiting for joint approval. This is not disobedience, it is devotion. The Kriegers do not understand war as something negotiated or shared. For them, war is execution. Orders are gospel, and action is the only language worth speaking. Allies then become observers, or worse, distractions. Their presence is tolerated, not embraced. To fight alongside the Death Corps is to be reminded of your own humanity, and how fragile it is. Many soldiers find them unnerving. They never remove their masks. They never joke. They never argue. You might sit beside one in a dugout for hours, and he will not acknowledge you. He might take a las bolt to the shoulder, and you'll see no flinch. He might die in your arms and offer no words. Just the quiet hiss of a rebreather slowing to a stop. It is not that they are cruel. It is that they are alien in their restraint. But the effect on morale is more complex than fear. In some cases, the presence of Kriegers instills resolve. Their indifference to pain, their willingness to die by the hundreds for a single strongpoint, it creates a grim sort of motivation. If they can do that, what excuse do we have? Officers speak of soldiers performing better under Krieger observation, not out of inspiration, but out of shame. No one wants to appear weak beside a man who will march through flame without blinking. Yet this same presence can be corrosive. Units unused to prolonged exposure to Krieg methods find themselves unraveling. When the Death Corps initiate an assault, they do not wait for support. They attack even when conditions are suicidal. And if the enemy responds with equal brutality, it is the Allied units that suffer, unprepared for the level of sacrifice expected. Casualties soar. Requests for retreat are ignored. Entire platoons find themselves abandoned, not through cruelty, but through the Death Corps' unwillingness to deviate from their path. For civilians, it is worse. On liberated worlds, Kriegers are greeted with confusion, fear, even hostility. They do not smile, they do not celebrate, they do not reassure. They simply secure the area, treat everyone as a potential threat, and leave as soon as their objective is met. In post-battle reconstruction, they are useless. In diplomacy, impossible. They are soldiers of death, not peace. And the survivors they save often find themselves wishing someone else had arrived instead. Yet for high command, the Death Corps are a blessing. They follow orders without fail. They require no morale boosting, no downtime, no comforts. They perform suicidal missions without negotiation. Where other regiments falter, the Kriegers persist. They are not deployed to win hearts. They are deployed to win wars. Or at the very least, to bleed the enemy until they lose the will to fight. So when the Kriegers come to town, the ground trembles. Not from their boots, but from what they represent. The end of compromise, the end of negotiation, the arrival of a war not fought to win, but to endure. And when they leave, if they leave, they take nothing with them. No spoils, no honors, just the silence they brought and the trenches they leave behind like scars on the land. Mercy is not a word known on Krieg. It does not exist in their lexicon, in their training, or in their doctrine. To the Death Corps, the very concept is a weakness, a luxury afforded only to those who have not yet learned the cost of rebellion. In their world, mercy was what enabled treachery. Mercy was the indulgence that fractured their planet and necessitated its atomic purging. In every act of compassion, they see the seed of future betrayal. So they do not hesitate, they do not question, they do not show mercy, because to them, mercy is heresy. This philosophy manifests in every aspect of how they treat the wounded. Enemy or ally, it matters little. A Krieger who finds an injured foe does not administer aid. If the enemy is still breathing, they are a threat. If they are not, they are discarded. There are no prisoners taken unless specifically ordered, and even then, they are treated not as people, but as inventory. Shackled, silenced, marched at bayonet point. A wounded enemy who begs for water receives only a glance. If the Krieger has a spare bullet, mercy may come swiftly. If not, the battlefield offers its own slow justice. And yet, what is even more harrowing is how they treat their own. A Krieger who is wounded does not call for help. To do so would be shameful, not out of pride, but out of failure. Injury is seen as an inconvenience to the mission, an impediment to duty. If the wound is minor, they patch it in silence. If it is major, they either crawl to a field surgeon without a word or request final rites and a bolt to the head. There are no screams, no pleas, only the cold calculus of efficiency. Field medics among the Death Corps are not symbols of hope, but instruments of triage. Their role is not to save lives, but to preserve function. A leg wound, amputate and return to duty. A gut shot, administer morphine and leave them behind. A head injury, mark the helmet and move on. They carry fewer painkillers than standard medics, not because they lack resources, but because pain is expected. A soldier who cannot fight is not mourned, he is replaced. Even among other regiments, this attitude causes tension. Cadian medics, Mordian officers, Vostroyan commanders, many have found themselves clashing with Krieger doctrine when it comes to casualties. There are reports of Kriegers executing wounded allies who were deemed irrecoverable, not out of malice, but out of mercy, as they define it. A mercy that leaves no one to linger, a mercy that cuts out the weakness before it spreads. Perhaps the most chilling stories involve what happens when Kriegers are captured. Rare though it is, there have been instances, ambushes, overwhelming numbers, orbital miscalculations. When taken alive, Kriegers do not resist in the traditional sense. They do not scream or spit defiance. They wait, they endure. And if they find an opportunity, they kill themselves before they can be used. Some carry hidden charges. Others find ways to end their lives with tools, terrain, or even sheer will. Interrogators speak of the emptiness in their eyes, of the silence that no amount of pain can break. For the Death Corps to be captured is not shame. It is a failure of the machine, one that must be corrected at any cost. And in the rare event that a Krieger shows empathy, a hesitation, a kindness, a moment of doubt, it is dealt with immediately. Whether through peer enforcement or superior decree, the deviant is removed. Some believe such individuals are executed. Others think they are reassigned to suicide units. The truth, as with so much about the Death Corps, is buried beneath layers of silence and smoke. To outsiders, this code seems monstrous. It flies in the face of everything we cling to in war, the belief that even in horror, humanity persists. But the Kriegers are not concerned with that. To them, the war is never ending. There is no time for sentiment, no room for compromise. The Emperor does not demand kindness, he demands results. And mercy, that fragile, flickering light, is too easily extinguished in the mud and blood of the trenches. In the end, the Death Corps do not hate, they do not love, they do not feel as others feel. And in that emotional void, they find their strength. Because where others might falter, might question, might show mercy, the Kriegers press forward, always forward, into the fire, into the teeth of the enemy, into oblivion. Not because they do not know what mercy is, but because they do, and have chosen to bury it forever. Faith for the Death Korps of Krieg is not spoken. It is not sung in hymns, not raised in sermons, not painted on banners fluttering in the wind. It is not found in words at all. Their devotion to the Emperor is expressed through silence, through suffering, through death. Where others pray, they obey. Where others hope, they endure. Their faith is not a comfort. It is a burden, a punishment, and a lifelong debt to be paid in blood and ash. They do not worship in temples. Their cathedral is the trench. Their altar is the battlefield. The last gun is their censer, and the gas mask their vestment. Each battle is a mass, each death a sacrament. Every order followed, every suicide charge executed without pause, is an act of communion with the God Emperor. In their worldview, salvation is not found in understanding the Emperor's will. It is in obeying it blindly, absolutely, unto death. The moment one questions, one risks heresy. Faith lies in the void where doubt once lived. Unlike the ecclesiarchy's firebrands or the Sisters of Battle's exalted wrath, the Kriegers show no ecstasy in their devotion. They do not weep or cry out the Emperor's name as they die. They die in silence, believing that each fallen body is a prayer louder than any voice. Their corpses become offerings. Their blood stains the soil into sanctity. No relics are needed, no icons. The only sacred thing they carry is the weight of obedience. And that they carry well. Their chaplains are not preachers, but keepers of this terrible faith. Krieg's own variant of the Ministorum functions less as spiritual guides and more as enforcers of theological silence. They do not lead prayer. They inspect, correct, and remove any sign of spiritual weakness. In other regiments, preachers may rouse troops with tales of the Emperor's light. Among the Death Corps, such emotion is discouraged. The Emperor does not need songs, he needs corpses. And they provide them one trench at a time. What makes their faith particularly chilling is its self-erasure. The Death Corps does not ask to be remembered. They do not seek sainthood. They are not martyrs in the traditional sense. A martyr dies for a cause, to inspire others. A Krieger dies because that is what he was made to do. There is no expectation of reward, no vision of paradise. If anything, many seem to believe that death is merely the first step in a longer penance, that only through infinite sacrifice can Krieg's ancient sin be cleansed. Even in their limited interactions with other guard units, their faith is unsettling. They do not engage in rituals or blessings before battle. They do not kneel, do not chant. When others call upon the Emperor's protection, the Kriegers simply march forward. It is not arrogance, it is acceptance. They do not believe they will be protected, only that they must serve, whether or not protection comes. To live is not victory, to die is not failure. Both are simply expressions of faith. There are tales, too, whispered by those who have fought beside them, of strange moments in the dead of night. A Krieger, wounded and alone, crawling through the mud, whispering not prayers but numbers. His serial code, his designation, his mission objective, repeated like a mantra. As if in the absence of identity, this recitation becomes his tether to purpose. Perhaps that too is a form of prayer. Not to be saved, but to remain useful until the end. And yet, for all their silence, for all their emotionless devotion, the Death Corps are perhaps among the most faithful in the Imperium. Not because they understand the Emperor better than others, but because they have chosen to serve him in the most brutal, unrewarding way possible. They have no delusions of being uplifted, no dreams of ascension. They have embraced a faith without hope, a piety without light. They believe absolutely that their suffering is the Emperor's will. This is not zealotry. It is something colder, deeper. It is a kind of spiritual fatalism that burns so completely it leaves no room for anything else. And in this, perhaps, they are the purest of all the Emperor's children. Not the brightest, not the loudest, not the most blessed, but the most obedient, the most enduring, the most willing to bleed without ever asking why. In a galaxy where faith often becomes spectacle, the Death Corps remains quiet. And in that silence, they speak louder than all the rest. There is no end to war for the Death Corps of Krieg, not because victory is unattainable, but because victory is irrelevant. A campaign may conclude, a planet may be declared pacified, but for the Kriegers, the war never ends. It only relocates. It shifts from one mud-choked battlefield to another, each indistinguishable from the last, each echoing the same endless rhythm of trench, advance, bombardment, and death. Time becomes a blur. Years stretch into decades, campaigns become generations, and the Death Corps remains. Some regiments cycle. They are deployed, they fight, they are rotated out, they are granted rest, reassignment, even reward. But not the Death Corps. They do not request leave. They do not seek relief. Their deployments stretch on until either the war ends or they do. And when the last Krieger of a company falls, there is no ceremony. A new wave is sent, identical uniforms, identical discipline, identical silence. The war continues without pause, without memory, without grief. There are records of sieges lasting 10 years or more, with Krieger regiments entrenched for the duration. 10 years in the same sector, facing the same enemy, digging deeper, dying slower, grinding forward inch by inch. Their trenches become cities of the dead. Bunkers turned into tombs, shell craters transformed into latrines, then graves, then shelters again. There is no beginning or end to their time in the field, only continuity. A flow of duty that does not stop to measure days. And what does that do to a mind? To live in the same uniform, the same trench, the same cycle of violence for years on end? For most humans, even soldiers, the mind begins to fray. But the Kriegers are conditioned for this. Their sense of self is diminished by design. Their past is irrelevant. Their future is assured in death. They do not mark birthdays. They do not track time. There are no holidays, no anniversaries, no moments of reflection. Only war. Even logistics bends to this reality. Krieger regiments maintain their own supply chains, often independent of standard Astra Militarum infrastructure. Ammunition, rations, equipment, all provided with ruthless efficiency without dependence on morale-boosting luxuries. Their food is nutrient-paced. Their medicine is minimal. Their downtime is occupied with digging, cleaning, reinforcing. Even when not fighting, they are preparing to die. But sometimes, the campaign outlives even their patience. In worlds like Vrax, the Death Corps laid siege for so long that entire generations of soldiers were born, trained, deployed, and buried on the same planet. Think about that. An entire lifespan from induction to extinction spent fighting for a piece of ground that no longer remembers what peace looked like. And when those regiments were spent, new ones came. Not for glory, not even for success. Just because that is what Krieg does. It sends its dead to die again. There are rumors, unconfirmed, unspoken, of regiments that refused to leave even after the war was declared over. Dug in so deeply, so completely, that they ignored orders, kept patrolling, kept reinforcing, waiting for an enemy that no longer existed. In some dark corners of the Imperium, it is said that these ghost regiments still exist. Still fighting, decades later, unaware or unconvinced that the war has ended. If true, it is not insanity. It is loyalty taken to its most horrific extreme. And when the Administratum finally reassigns them, if it does, there is no resistance. The Kriegers pack what remains of their gear, burn what cannot be carried, and march to the transports. They do not look back. They do not grieve. The war will resume elsewhere. It always does. Other regiments have survivors who return home, veterans who tell stories, who write memoirs, who find peace, or at least the illusion of it. The Death Corps have no such luxuries. Home is a myth. Their veterans are rare, and those few who survive long enough to be withdrawn are often reassigned as trainers, chaplains, or officers, still in uniform, still behind the mask. The war follows them, or perhaps they follow it. Because for the Death Corps, war is not a phase. It is not an emergency. It is not even a necessity. It is the reason for their existence. It is the only environment in which they function. The only reality they understand. And when the guns fall silent, when the trenches go still, when the last enemy is slain, the Kriegers do not relax. They prepare, because they know the truth. The war never ends. It only sleeps, and they will be there when it wakes. In a world without names, without voices, without warmth, how do bonds form? Among the Death Korps of Krieg, the answer is not easily found, but it exists, somewhere beneath the ash and silence. They are trained to erase the self, to view one another as tools, as parts of a great engine of war. And yet, despite every attempt to suppress it, something flickers. Something lingers in the quiet glances between soldiers, in the unspoken gestures, in the act of standing shoulder to shoulder, not just out of duty, but of choice. They do not speak, not unless necessary. Orders are given with hand signals, relayed through radio bursts or silent nods. But within that absence of speech, a language of gesture develops. A Krieger who places an extra ration near another's bunk, who tightens a comrade's armor straps without being asked, who pauses to share a moment's cover during an advance. These are not signs of friendship in the traditional sense. They are something deeper, something older, recognition. In many war zones, psychological reports from Allied regiments speak of seeing Kriegers move in synchronicity, not just by training, but by a kind of mutual instinct. Two soldiers digging the same trench will adjust to one another's rhythm. One will take over a wounded comrade's task without prompting. When one falls, another picks up the load. Not because they were ordered to, not because they expect reward, but because, beneath the layers of doctrine and conditioning, there is still a shared humanity, a bond not declared but enacted. There are no photographs of families carried in their armor, no good luck charms, no journals or tokens of home. Yet some say that among the corpses of the fallen, you might occasionally find a small engraving on the inside of a rebreather filter. Not a name, that would be forbidden, but a mark, a symbol, a pattern carved with a nail or the tip of a bayonet. Perhaps meaningless, perhaps a memory, perhaps a way of saying, I was here, in a world that forbids saying anything at all. Some veterans, very few and very quiet, have spoken of moments when a fellow Krieger pulled them out of a trench collapse, when one shielded another from shrapnel, when, in the brief moments between bombardments, one rested a gloved hand on another's shoulder. These are not the grand gestures of friendship seen in other regiments. But among the Death Corps, they carry weight. They are not signs of rebellion. They are signs that even in the furnace of Krieg's doctrine, the embers of connection cannot be fully extinguished. Fan theories expand on this idea, that over long campaigns, pairs or small squads of Kriegers develop a kind of silent kinship. They learn to read each other's movements, to anticipate reactions, to protect without instruction. These bonds are never acknowledged aloud. To do so would be to violate the very foundation of their training. But they are there, in the way one Krieger hesitates just slightly when their comrade falls, in the way another chooses to die beside the fallen rather than retreat to safety. And then there are the stories, unverifiable of course, of Kriegers who go missing in action and are found months later, still alive, surviving in the ruins of a battlefield with only one other companion. During that time, no words are exchanged, no names are shared. But when one dies, the other buries them with care, lays their weapon beside them, carves a small marker. Nothing ornate, just a gesture, one that says, you mattered, even if I was never allowed to say it. Romantic love is a concept almost entirely absent in the Death Corps. There are no families, no courtship, no marriages. But affection, of a kind, might still exist. Not through touch or expression, but through presence, the way two soldiers might always end up in the same foxhole, the way one might share warmth during cold nights without hesitation, the way another might step into danger just slightly sooner, as if to spare someone else the burden. It is not love as we know it. It is something stranger, something more tragic. Because these bonds, once formed, cannot be named. They cannot be mourned. When one Krieger dies, the others do not hold ceremonies. They do not mark the loss. But in the next assault, you might see a soldier carry 2 shovels. You might notice one fighting with unusual fury, even if the mask reveals nothing. These are the echoes of connection, unspoken, unacknowledged, but real. And perhaps that is the ultimate irony. The Death Corps of Krieg are designed to be faceless, interchangeable, emotionless. But in trying to erase the self completely, Krieg may have created the rarest kind of bond, one forged not in words or promises, but in silence and shared suffering. A loyalty that does not need to speak, because it already understands. In the endless archives of the Administratum, the campaigns of the Death Corps of Krieg are recorded in cold, unfeeling numbers. But beneath those numbers lie stories of blood, mud, and silence. Battles fought with a kind of fanaticism so absolute it defies comprehension. These are not campaigns won through brilliance or tactical ingenuity. They are victories paid for in flesh, in bones left buried under trench lines that spanned continents. Their legacies are not told in songs, but in casualty reports and cratered wastelands where nothing will grow for millennia. Vrax is perhaps the most infamous. A fortress world that became a battlefield for nearly 2 decades, its soil now synonymous with the word siege. When the heretic Cardinal Zaphon declared independence from the Imperium, Krieg responded not with outrage, but with a grim sense of purpose. They laid siege to the world with over 8 million troops, entrenching the entire planet. The Death Corps didn't just fight. They transformed the surface into a vision of hell. They dug mile after mile of trenches, built underground tunnel networks, fortified every approach, and advanced inch by inch through a meat grinder of their own making. The enemy, chaos cultists, renegades, traitor Astartes, met them with madness. But even madness recoils at inevitability. Every attack, every defense, every ambush was answered by more Kriegers. When the defenders poisoned the land, the Kriegers dug deeper. When artillery barrages reduced fortresses to rubble, they marched through the dust. They breached the citadel of Vrax not with heroics, but with attrition. By the end, over 20 million were dead. Entire cities were flattened, and the Death Corps had no celebrations, no parades. They simply left. Then there was Armageddon, the apocalyptic war against Gazkol's orcs. The Kriegers were not deployed at first, but when the scale of the threat became clear, the Imperium called upon them. Their assignment? Hold the flanks. Defend the hive cities. Dig in and never yield. And so they did. In the toxic ash wastes amid endless greenskin waves, the Kriegers built trench lines that orcs smashed themselves against for years. Their casualties were astronomical, but their line never broke. Hive Acheron was surrounded, besieged, but never taken. Not because of brilliant tactics, but because the Death Corps would not die fast enough for the orcs to win. On Krieg itself, there are legends of training campaigns that resemble full-scale wars. Regiments test themselves against each other in mock sieges that last months, with live ammunition, real entrenchments, and no distinction between exercise and battlefield. These games are bloodier than most planetary assaults, and yet they are not considered noteworthy. Just part of the regimen. Another preparation for the real war, the Eternal War. Even smaller operations, like the siege of Nyrak City or the purging of Iskaros Hive, carry the same pattern. A brief period of Krieger arrival, quiet, disciplined, efficient, followed by months or years of trench warfare, artillery bombardments, and massed infantry charges that consume entire populations. There are no dramatic breakthroughs, no famous generals, just coordinates, timetables, and casualty ratios. Victory, when it comes, looks like a graveyard that no longer resists. And the Kriegers never speak of these victories. There are no memoirs, no written reflections. The few scribes who accompany them write more about the silence than the war. They note how the Kriegers never questioned orders, never celebrated a breach, never showed anger when a comrade was torn apart. Only the work. Always the work. A battlefield cleared is just ground to be fortified. A fortress conquered is just a new command post. There are rare accounts, scattered, fragmented, of individual acts of valor. A Krieger who held a trench alone for 2 days. Another who dragged wounded soldiers through a firestorm without ever speaking a word. But these are anomalies, and even they are recounted in the same sterile tone as ammunition usage. The Kriegers themselves never acknowledge them. The deeds vanish into the mud, just like the men who performed them. Yet the legacy remains, not in statues or honors, but in the way other regiments react when Kriegers are mentioned. In the way commanders request them for hopeless assaults. In the way enemies dread their arrival, not because they will lose, but because they know the war will no longer end quickly. The Death Korps of Krieg do not fight to win. They fight to bury, to grind, to outlast. Their campaigns are monuments not to heroism, but to endurance. And in that endurance, in that endless willingness to die for a cause long since abstracted, they leave behind a legacy far more terrifying than any victory cry. A legacy carved in mud, shaped in silence, and written in the bones of those who stood before them. There is a terrible beauty in obedience taken to its final form. The Death Korps of Krieg embody that truth. A people who sacrifice not only their lives but their identities, their voices, their very humanity, to become tools of vengeance for a crime committed long before they were born. And in their grim resolve, in their endless procession into mud and fire, we see the most profound and horrifying expression of imperial doctrine. That loyalty, taken too far, becomes indistinguishable from death. What does it cost to build a regiment like the Death Korps? Not just in resources or training, but in essence. These soldiers are not simply conditioned, they are erased. Each Krieger is born not from love, but from necessity. Not to live, but to die in the Emperor's name. Every moment of their lives is spent in anticipation of the end. Every act, no matter how small, is a contribution toward their ultimate offering, their body, broken and discarded on some nameless battlefield light years from home. And the Imperium rewards them not with honor, but with anonymity. No medals, no retirements, no songs, just a cold, bureaucratic acknowledgement of service rendered. Their deaths are recorded not individually, but in tallies. Regiments vanish, entire battalions swallowed by warp storms or massacred on hostile moons, and the only response is to requisition more. No questions asked, no grief expressed. For Krieg, the dead are never lost, they are merely repaid. But the true cost is not only borne by the Kriegers, it is borne by the galaxy itself, because when we look upon the Death Korps and call them heroes, we forget that they are also victims. Victims of a system so vast, so impersonal, so impossibly cruel, that it sees no difference between redemption and extinction. The Kriegers are not just soldiers, they are a warning. A mirror held up to the Imperium itself, showing what happens when duty replaces conscience, when obedience replaces thought. Their tragedy lies in the fact that they are not evil. They are not twisted by chaos, not broken by selfishness or pride. They are what the Imperium considers perfect. And in that perfection, they are utterly lost. They do not dream, they do not hope, they do not choose, they simply follow into fire, into ruin, into the grave. Not because they do know better, but because they believe that not knowing better is holiness. And yet, despite everything, there is something in them that endures. A spark buried deep beneath the layers of ash and steel. You see it not in their victories, but in their silence. In the way they stand together, faceless and forgotten, yet unbroken. In the way they continue to march, even when there's nothing left to fight for, no enemy in sight, no commanders to issue orders. They march because that is what they are. Motion without meaning, will without identity. But perhaps the most devastating question we must ask is this: was it worth it? Was the price of absolute obedience, of a regiment that never questions, never retreats, never lives, justified by the wars they've won, the heresies they've crushed, the lines they've held? Can we call it victory when all that remains are the bones of the faithful and the silence of the devout? Because in every Krieger who falls, in every trench they leave behind, in every battlefield where their bodies outnumber their enemies, there is no celebration. There is only the echo of a promise made by a long-dead world, that Krieg would never rebel again. And in keeping that promise, they erased themselves, not from history but from life. So the next time we speak of the Death Korps of Krieg, let us not only admire their resolve, let us mourn it. Let us remember that the Imperium's greatest weapons are also its greatest tragedies. That to create the perfect soldier, the Imperium first had to kill the man. and that somewhere, deep beneath the layers of ash and doctrine, there may still be something human left, something that knows it is dying and has chosen to die anyway. If this glimpse into the cold, tragic world of the Death Corps moved you, subscribe to the channel. There's more still buried in the trenches. Stories of war, sacrifice, and the grim echoes of humanity in a galaxy without hope.